Hey everyone, FastApi is a Python library that is used in order to create REST interfaces and in general APIs. In one of the previous episodes, we have presented the AAO SQL, which is also a Python library, but is used in order to interface with databases. So you can use the AAO SQL library, great library we have presented. It's really an amazing one. That helps you write SQLs in a well-organized form in order to interface with databases in Python. And FastApi is a great library for APIs. So if you use both, you can get the SQLs on the backend side and the APIs on the front end of the service in order to interface with other services. So I think with the name, we can already understand what they try to achieve with FastApi. They try to give you something which you can ramp up pretty fast, simple, good documentation, and also stable. So basically, this library already has 32k stars on GitHubs, which means it's heavily used. From their documentations, they said that some core Windows components use it, which means it's pretty stable. If some core Windows components have decided to use the FastApi, I think we can safely assume that this library is pretty safe, ordered up, robust, production ready to use. So let's start by saying, what do we want out of a framework or a library that would assist us in writing APIs? Basically, we want it to be simple. We don't want it to get in our way. So I think FastApi will do a great job in this. But we also want to make sure that many people are using it. And in FastApi, we have 32k stars in GitHub. And as we said, some core components are at least planning to use it. We want to be able to test it either automatically and also manually. What do we mean by manually? We mean that we want some web page where we can access, specify the API that we want to call, put in the input JSON, click button test, and get back the result. So this is also something that we want out of an API library. We want it to have both good documentation, the library itself, and also we want the library to be able to generate to us automatically documentation, so that if you wrote and get or put or post the API, you want to get automatically a documentation for it. So FastApi will also give it to you. I think it looks like a great choice for API creations. And by the way, it has also a sister library named the Type API, which allows you to create CLI interfaces. Okay, so basically it gives this, and now the question is whether it is polished, production ready, and fast. So at least according to the documentation, and I tend to believe this library because of the little research that I did on it over the internet and some forums, that it's having a really good performance, resemblance to Go language, or if you worked with Node.js, you can expect a pretty good performance out of it. So it's not some library that you are going to use and get some lower performance out of other. You're going to get pretty good performance out of it. So what do we have here? We have a library that, according to documentation, is simple. We can see also examples, and we'll see a few examples. We see a library that is pretty performant, can generate documentation automatically, have a lot of users using it, and with good performance and stability. Looks good so far. Also, on the feature side, it also supports and can integrate with WebSockets, GraphQL, and Core. So there are some extras to it, which is not in the main flow, but it's also good to know that if you'll need to interface with some of those components, then it's going to be well integrated and documented. In order to install this library, you use, for example, pip install FastApi. This would install this library in your Python environment, and then you could also install some standard web server like pip install unicorn. And then you can start the server with unicorn my main.app and -- reload in order to automatically reload the changes that you have. In order to write some code in this FastApi, then you first declare your application, because we are writing a service, a REST API interface, so we want an entry point. The entry point would be app equals FastApi round brackets. FastApi round brackets in Python is like in Java doing a new FastApi. So it's creating a new object of type FastApi, and this would be your entry point into the FastApi application. And so we have defined app equals FastApi round brackets. And now we have the FastApi in our app object. So let's say we want to create an API REST get interface that would list the users. So get users. So we write strudel app.get, and then in round brackets you write the slash and the path to your get request. So strudel app.get, and then in round brackets /users. Okay, one line. And then just below it, this is like an annotation, and then below it you define the function. So you define the function in Python with def, some function, and then we could simply return some arbitrary users in our use case. So we can return, and with curly braces define some JSON object that would return. So basically we have here like 3 lines. First line is up is equal FastApi round brackets, which creates the new object of FastApi. Then we use it in order to create a get request with strudel app.get and then the path, and then we define the function def some function, and then we return the users or call the database to get the user with the SQL. So return in curly braces, and the JSON object to return, you just write the JSON object inline for the sake of an example. As for the documentation, if you access the web server that you just started with web API with port 8000/docs, then you will see the documentation of your the APIs that you wrote. And also over there, over the docs, you would be able to click a button which is named Try It Out. And this would be basically either Swagger or Redoc documentation where you can actually test the API. So this was also our requirement to be able to automatically generate some documentation and then access it in order to actually test the API, which is really great because you get also the documentation and accessing the API. So what do we have here? We have a library with many case of stars in GitHub. Looks pretty simple to use, will not get in your way. There are a lot of evidence over the web that it's stable, that it's fast. It's a great candidate for the library for the REST interface in your Python web server. We'll create the documentation, can interface with all the extras of WebSocket, CORS, GraphQL. Fast and stable, generates the documentation, pretty simple to write, very readable, and overall looks like a great library. If I needed today to interface with some SQL database, I would choose for Python, specifically for Python AOSQL, and then with the combination of FastApi to write the APIs, I think these two are making a great combination for modern yet stable, yet fast generation of REST interfaces where you can use the great language SQL to interface with the databases in a more organized way in AOSQL, and use the FastApi library in order to create the APIs with documentation, with testing. Looks good. So this was it. FastApi, hope you enjoyed it. See you next time, guys.